Christina's Ghost, Chapter 15. Let's get out of here! Uncle Ralph crossed the parlor in one long leap. He snatched the comic book from Chris's hands and flipped the pages. "He's coming!" Chris shrieked. "Listen!" The footstep reached the top of the stairs. "He's going to come down," Chris said. "Let's get out of here!" "And don't you know why he's coming down?" Uncle Ralph demanded hoarsely. "We're getting too close to his secret. That's why. Russell Charles was trying to tell us something." He shook the comic book really hard. A glazine envelope, long and narrow like a bookmark, fell to the floor. "There it is!" he shouted. The footsteps started down the stairs. Thump, thump. Uncle Ralph dived for the envelope, but before he could pick it up, the icy wind swept the room. The envelope skittered across the floor. "I'll get it," Chris squealed. She snatched up the envelope and looked around for an escape route. Not the front door. That would mean facing the thing that was on the stairs. She ran to a window. The nearest one was painted shut. She struggled with the second until Uncle Ralph pushed her aside and jerked it open. "Out you go," he shouted. "Quick!" The cold wind roared around Chris, and the footsteps on the stairs were as loud as thunder. She tumbled through the window out onto the porch. Uncle Ralph was right behind her. At the top of the steps, he grabbed her hand and they jumped off the porch together. "Around the back," Uncle Ralph panted. "Head for the car." Chris felt as if she were running through a swamp that sucked at her feet and held her back. Can't run," she gasped. Uncle Ralph pulled her along. "Yes, you can," he said. "Just make sure you hang on to that envelope, sport." They reached the car. Uncle Ralph swung open the door on the driver's side, and he threw Chris right across the seat. Then he jumped in after her and slammed the door. The keys were in the ignition. There was a heart-stopping moment when the motor sputtered, quit, and then roared to life. "That's my good old baby," Uncle Ralph muttered. "That's my girl." He swung the car around so the headlights rested full on the house. Curtains and draperies billowed furiously out every window. Lights flickered on and off all over the house. Then the back door flew open, and the towering figure of the attic's ghost was silhouetted in the headlight's beam. "He's coming!" Chris screamed. "He's coming after us!" Uncle Ralph pulled hard on the wheel, and the car shot into the narrow, winding road that led to the highway. The trees formed a tunnel around them, and as the car bounced through it, the branches ahead seemed to bow down, as though the branches ahead were trying to hit the roof and stop them from going. "He's trying to stop us," Chris cried. "What are we going to do?" Uncle Ralph clutched the steering wheel like a race car driver. "Hang on, sport," he said through his clenched teeth. "This is still Dixon's territory. Do you have that envelope?" Chris held up the strip of glazine. "Good. Don't wrinkle it." "Wrinkle it?" Chris exclaimed. "I can hardly hold it. I'm shaking so hard." "Then put it in the glove compartment and go ahead and shake," Uncle Ralph snapped. He winced as a branch snapped across the windshield. "We're almost back to civilization." As he said it, they shot out onto the highway. A semi-trailer truck swerved around them with startled blasts of a horn. "Cool it, bub," Uncle Ralph said. He raced after the truck. Other cars were coming toward them now, lights reassuring in the forest dark. Far ahead, the lights of Woodland Motel twinkled. "We're okay," Uncle Ralph said. "We've made it." But Chris noticed that he didn't slow down. Not at the gas stations or the bait shops, and the small shingled houses of Clearwater began flying past did he take his foot off the gas finally. "There's a little coffee shop right smack in the middle of town," he said. "We'll go there." Good, Chris thought. Ghosts didn't show themselves at coffee shops, did they? When they parked in front of the little restaurant, Chris discovered that her knees were still trembling. She shook as she removed the envelope from the glove compartment, followed Uncle Ralph into the restaurant, and settled in a high-back booth. She laid the glazine envelope in the middle of the table and stared at it. Across from her, Uncle Ralph wiped his face with a handkerchief. He took a deep breath, like a swimmer coming up from the air, for air. "You want to open that thing, Christina?" he asked. "You deserve to. You're the one who got it away from him." Chris shuddered. She glanced out at the street where tourists strolled, eating ice cream cones and enjoying the soft summer night. She would have liked to be one of them. Walking down Clearwater's Main Street, eating an ice cream cone, was all the adventure that she'd ever want again. "We'll do that tomorrow," Uncle Ralph said once again, seeming to read her mind. "Open that envelope, will you?" Chris worked a grubby fingernail under the envelope's flap. 2 strips of stamps slipped out of the table. There were 4 silver gray ones with a picture of George Washington. The other strip was made of 5 stamps printed on a reddish brown. "Who's that?" Chris asked. Uncle Ralph stared at the stamps in awe. "Well, that's Benjamin Franklin," he said. He touched the strips with his cautious finger. "I don't know much about stamps," he said slowly, "but I've seen pictures of both of these, and I've read about them. They're part of the very first stamp issue printed in the United States government." "The very first?" "And she'd carried them around in a comic book. They don't have those little holes that help you tear them apart," she pointed out. "Maybe they're fakes." Uncle Ralph shook his head. "In 1847, when these were printed, the government didn't use perforations. That came later. The fact that these are in perfect condition and haven't been cut apart makes them especially valuable, I'm sure." Chris was thrilled. She thought of the millions of stamps on millions of letters on their way to people all over the country. Finding these first ones was like uncovering a national treasure. A waitress brought Uncle Ralph coffee and the cinnamon apple pie he'd ordered. Chris had a chocolate milkshake and a cheese sandwich. She discovered she was starving, and Uncle Ralph seemed just to be as hungry. They ate without talking, but Chris realized that this silence was nothing like the gloomy silence of their first meals together. A couple of times, Uncle Ralph patted the pocket where he'd put the stamps for safekeeping. When the pie was gone and his cup had been filled for a second time, he leaned back with a sigh. "Now, let's take another look," he said. He laid the stamps on the table again. "Do you realize how close we came to missing these?" he said. "If it weren't a comic book fan, for example, and if I hadn't left the right book on the dining room table," Chris said. She was remembering in the afternoon when she'd taken a couple of comics out to the end of the pier. One of them had blown into the water while she sunbathed. "And if it weren't for Russell Charles," Uncle Ralph added, "poor little kid, caught up in a mystery he didn't want any part of." "I wonder what he'll do now," Chris said. "And what's going to happen to that awful Dixon? Do you think he's going to go thumping and raging around the house forever and ever?" Uncle Ralph slid the stamps back into the envelope. "All I'm sure of," he said, "is that we're not going back tonight to find out." Then he leaned across the table and raised an eyebrow at Chris. "Unless, of course, you insist on it, Christina." "I'll go back if you want to. We aim to please."